They said she'd crack under interrogation until she turned 3 enemy agents and exposed an entire spy network. This story begins at the FBI's Quantico headquarters in Virginia, where Special Agent Jessica Phoenix Thompson was completing her psychological evaluation for assignment to the Bureau's Elite Behavioral Analysis Unit. At 29 years old, Jessica had an impressive record: 6 years in military intelligence, 2 combat deployments, and a doctorate in criminal psychology from Harvard University. But her evaluators weren't convinced she had what it took for the Bureau's most dangerous undercover operations. "Agent Thompson," said Dr. Michael Stevens, the FBI's chief psychological assessor, reviewing her file with obvious concern, "your psychological profile shows exceptionally high empathy scores, intense emotional responses to trauma, and what we classify as over-identification with victims. These traits make you excellent at understanding criminals, but they raise serious questions about your ability to withstand hostile interrogation." Jessica sat calmly in the sterile evaluation room at Quantico, her hands folded professionally. "Dr. Stevens, with respect, I think those traits are being misinterpreted. High empathy doesn't make me vulnerable. It makes me capable of reading people in ways that traditional agents can't. I can predict behavior, identify psychological weaknesses, and manipulate responses because I understand how minds work under pressure." Assistant Director Robert Ice Harrison, a 20-year veteran who had survived 3 undercover operations that went wrong, shook his head grimly. "Thompson, psychological operations in the field aren't academic exercises. When organized crime families or foreign agents get their hands on you, they use techniques designed to break FBI agents specifically. Your empathy, your emotional intelligence, those become tools they'll use to destroy you." Section Chief Maria Steele Rodriguez leaned forward with concern. "Jessica, we've lost good agents because they couldn't handle what these people do to captured federal officers. The Calabrese family, the Russian Bratva, the Chinese triads, they've been perfecting psychological torture techniques for decades. They study FBI training methods specifically to counter them. But Jessica had spent months analyzing case files of captured federal agents, studying interrogation videos, and developing theories that challenged conventional wisdom about psychological resistance. Ma'am, what if we're approaching this backwards? What if instead of trying to resist psychological manipulation, we learn to redirect it? Hook 1. But what happened next would shock the intelligence community. 8 months later, Jessica's unconventional theories would be tested in the most dangerous way possible during Operation Nightfall. The Bureau had been tracking a sophisticated criminal organization operating between New York City and Miami, a network that combined Italian-American organized crime with Russian intelligence assets and Chinese triads. The operation seemed routine. Jessica and her partner, Special Agent Marcus Wolfe Davidson, were posing as corrupt federal contractors while infiltrating a money laundering operation based in a legitimate shipping company in Newark, New Jersey. Their target was Vincent the Professor Torino, a Harvard-educated crime boss who used psychological manipulation as effectively as violence. But someone had betrayed them. Jessica was leaving a covert meeting in Liberty State Park when she noticed the signs every federal agent dreads. The same face twice in different locations, vehicles that maintained perfect surveillance distances, and the subtle coordination that indicated professional watchers. "Wolf, this is Phoenix," Jessica whispered into her concealed transmitter. "I think we've been made. Something's wrong here." But it was already too late. The trap had been set with military precision. Jessica fought back using her tactical training from Quantico, but she was facing professionals who had studied FBI defensive techniques. The last thing she remembered was a needle in her neck and the world dissolving into darkness. When Jessica regained consciousness, she was in a soundproof basement somewhere in the industrial areas of Newark. The room was designed for psychological torture. Bright lights that could be controlled remotely, speakers hidden in the walls, and cameras that recorded every angle. She was secured to a chair with restraints that had clearly been used on federal agents before. Across from her sat three people who represented the modern face of organized crime in America. Vincent the Professor Torino was exactly what his FBI file had described. Mid-40s, expensively dressed with the bearing of someone equally comfortable in Harvard lecture halls and back-alley executions. Beside him was Dr. Angela Mind-Bender Chen, a Chinese-American psychologist who had been expelled from Stanford for unethical research into psychological manipulation. The third person was Dmitry the Surgeon Volkov, a Russian-American who specialized in interrogations that left no physical evidence. Special Agent Thompson, Torino said in the cultured accent of Boston's elite universities, "Welcome to what I like to call a graduate seminar in applied psychology. I'm Professor Torino, and these are my colleagues Dr. Chen and Mr. Volkov. We're going to explore the fascinating intersection of criminal psychology and federal law enforcement training." Jessica assessed her situation with the analytical training she'd received at Quantico. She was alone, captured in enemy territory, facing three experts whose combined knowledge of FBI methods made them incredibly dangerous. According to Bureau protocols, she had perhaps 12 hours before the psychological pressure would begin, seriously compromising her ability to resist. But Jessica had developed strategies that weren't in any FBI manual, techniques based on her deep understanding of criminal psychology and her unconventional approach to psychological warfare. Re-hook 2, and that's when she turned the tables on her captors. "Professor Torino," Jessica said calmly, using his preferred title deliberately, "I have to say, your reputation precedes you. The Bureau's files on your psychological operations are quite impressive, particularly the way you broke Agent Williams in Boston 3 years ago." Torino raised an eyebrow. Most captured federal agents began with demands for lawyers, threats about Bureau retaliation, or attempts to negotiate. They didn't offer academic compliments to their captors. "Dr. Chen," Jessica continued, "I read your research papers before Stanford terminated your position. Your work on cognitive manipulation in high-stress environments was groundbreaking, even if the ethics committee didn't appreciate your methodology." Dr. Chen's expression showed surprise. This wasn't following any script from their previous interrogations of federal agents. "And Mr. Volkov," Jessica said, focusing on the third interrogator, "your techniques for psychological pressure without physical evidence are legendary in certain circles. The FBI has an entire case study on your methods at our training facility." Volkov's eyes narrowed. "Enough games, federal agent. You will tell us about your investigation, your evidence, and your Bureau contacts. We know exactly how to break FBI psychological conditioning." But Jessica smiled. "Mr. Volkov, you just revealed something important with that response. You're confident in your methods because they've worked on previous agents, but you're also defensive because you know the Bureau has been studying your techniques. That suggests you're aware your methods might be losing effectiveness." For the next 6 hours, Jessica did something unprecedented in federal law enforcement. Instead of trying to resist interrogation, she began conducting her own psychological analysis of her captors. Using profiling techniques she'd learned at Quantico and psychological insights from her Harvard training, she started mapping their personalities, their relationships, and their vulnerabilities. "Professor Torino," she said during what was supposed to be a stress session, "your academic background is fascinating. Harvard psychology, dissertation on criminal behavior modification, but then you left academia for organized crime. That suggests either financial pressure or academic rejection. Given your obvious intelligence, I'd guess the latter. Perhaps your research proposals were considered too ethically questionable even for academic psychology." Torino's scholarly composure cracked slightly. "You are attempting to deflect attention from your own situation. Actually, I'm demonstrating that psychological analysis works both ways. Dr. Chen, you can see it too. The micro-expressions of discomfort when his academic failure is mentioned. I'm betting you've noticed similar vulnerabilities but haven't mentioned them because professional courtesy is important in your working relationship." Re-hook 3. Little did they know, she was playing a much deeper game. As the interrogation continued in the Newark basement, Jessica began implementing a strategy that no FBI training manual had ever contemplated. Instead of protecting information, she started gathering intelligence. Every question her captors asked revealed something about their operations, their knowledge gaps, and their organizational structure. Every technique they used exposed their training methods and their psychological profiles. More importantly, Jessica began to understand the complex dynamics between her three captors. Torino was the intellectual leader, but he was under pressure from traditional crime families who questioned his psychological methods. Dr. Chen was brilliant but isolated, struggling to find acceptance in both academic and criminal circles. Volkov was effective but frustrated by being treated as a technician rather than a strategic partner. Jessica began exploiting these dynamics with the precision she'd learned studying criminal organizations at Quantico. "Dr. Chen," she said during the second day of interrogation, "I'm curious about something. Your psychological approach is clearly more sophisticated than traditional organized crime interrogation. Have you considered that you might be wasting your talents in this environment?" Chen's response was carefully controlled, but Jessica caught the brief flash of professional frustration. "Professor Torino's methods have proven effective." "Of course," Jessica agreed, "but effectiveness with previous subjects doesn't necessarily indicate optimal methodology. Your understanding of modern psychological manipulation is clearly superior to traditional mob techniques. I imagine legitimate research institutions would be very interested in your work if it were properly documented and ethically applied." Torino intervened sharply. "Dr. Chen, do not engage with the subject's manipulation attempts." But Jessica had already planted the seed. Over the following hours, she continued to subtly drive wedges between her captors, praising Chen's intelligence while questioning Torino's academic credentials, acknowledging Volkov's effectiveness while suggesting that the others didn't fully appreciate his strategic insights. The breakthrough came on the third day when Volkov made a crucial error. During what was supposed to be an isolation session designed to break Jessica's resolve, he revealed critical information about their operations timeline and structure. "Your bureau friends are searching every warehouse in Newark," Volkov said, trying to create psychological pressure. "But they won't find this location before we finish our work. We have until Friday to extract useful information, then we relocate to our Philadelphia facility." Jessica filed that intelligence away while continuing her psychological offensive. She had learned that their operation had specific geographical and temporal limitations, which meant they were under external pressure. More importantly, she had identified that they needed her cooperation rather than just her information. They were planning to use her somehow rather than simply eliminate her. Rehook 4. The next 72 hours would redefine psychological warfare. By the fourth day, Jessica had accomplished something unprecedented in federal law enforcement history. She had begun turning her captors against each other. The psychological pressure she was applying had created fractures in their professional relationships that she was systematically exploiting. "Professor Torino," she said during what was supposed to be an intensive interrogation session, "I've been analyzing your situation here. You're under pressure from traditional crime families to produce results using psychological methods they don't understand or trust. Meanwhile, your colleagues here probably question whether your academic approach is practical for street-level operations." Torino's response was sharp. "Our methods are producing the intelligence we require." "But that's just it," Jessica continued calmly. "Your methods are based on academic theories about criminal psychology. But I'm not a typical criminal subject. I'm a federal agent trained specifically to resist psychological manipulation. Dr. Chen understands this, which is why her modified techniques have been more effective than your traditional academic approaches." Jessica watched as Chen straightened slightly at the recognition, while Torino's expression showed irritation at having his methods questioned. "In fact," Jessica continued, "I've been wondering if Dr. Chen might be interested in a different kind of professional challenge. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is always looking for psychologists with her level of expertise." The work would be more intellectually stimulating than criminal interrogation, and the legal protections for psychological research would allow for much more innovative work. Enough, Volkov snapped. She is manipulating all of us. Can you not see what she is doing? But Jessica had expected this reaction. Mr. Volkov, you're absolutely right. I am manipulating this situation. The question is, why are you the only one who recognizes it immediately? Perhaps because you're the only one here who isn't compromised by academic ego or intellectual pride. For the next several hours, Jessica systematically dismantled the psychological cohesion of her interrogation team. She praised Volkov's practical intelligence while questioning Torino's theoretical approach. She acknowledged Chen's research abilities while suggesting that Torino felt threatened by her superior understanding of modern psychology. The operation began to unravel when Chen made a critical error. She began openly questioning Torino's methods, suggesting that Jessica's resistance indicated flaws in his academic approach to criminal psychology rather than exceptional federal training. Rehook 5. And in that moment, the victim became the hunter. The transformation Jessica had been working toward reached its climax on the 5th day when the psychological pressure she had been applying reached a breaking point. Volkov, frustrated by what he saw as the operation's failure and convinced that his colleagues were being outsmarted by a federal agent, made a decision that would expose their entire network. "This is pointless," Volkov declared during what was supposed to be a strategy session outside Jessica's cell. "She has turned us against each other, and the families will blame all of us when this operation fails. I'm not going to federal prison because Torino's psychology experiments don't work on real FBI agents." Jessica, listening through surveillance equipment she had identified during her careful observation of the facility, heard Volkov reveal crucial details about their operation, their connections to crime families in New York and Boston, and their network structure throughout the Northeast Corridor. But Jessica's greatest triumph wasn't the intelligence she gathered, it was what happened next. Over the following 48 hours, the 3 interrogators began making increasingly desperate attempts to salvage their operation, each secretly considering how to protect themselves from the consequences of failure. Dr. Chen was the first to crack. During a private session with Jessica, she began exploring whether the FBI might be interested in her cooperation. "Hypothetically," she said, "if someone with my background wanted to assist federal law enforcement, what kind of protection and consideration might be available?" Jessica recognized the opening she had been creating for days. "Dr. Chen, that would depend entirely on the value of the information and assistance provided. Someone with your access to criminal psychological operations and interrogation techniques would be incredibly valuable to federal law enforcement. The Bureau has comprehensive witness protection programs and opportunities for legitimate research partnerships." Within hours, Chen had provided Jessica with detailed information about criminal operations throughout the Northeast, including the identities of corrupt officials, the locations of safe houses, and the psychological profiles of dozens of criminal leaders. Volkov fell next, motivated by survival instinct rather than ideology. When he realized that Chen was negotiating her own protection, he decided to ensure his safety by providing even more valuable intelligence. "If you can guarantee my protection and relocation," he told Jessica, "I can give you the complete operational structure for organized crime interrogation and psychological warfare throughout the eastern United States." Torino, isolated and facing the complete collapse of his operation, made one final attempt to regain control. But Jessica had spent 5 days mapping his psychology, understanding his academic pride and his fear of professional failure. When he tried to threaten her with violence, she calmly explained exactly how his reputation would be destroyed when crime families learned that he had lost 2 valuable assets to a single FBI agent. "Professor Torino," she said, "you have 2 choices. You can continue this failed operation and face the consequences with your criminal associates, or you can join your colleagues in providing information that will allow you to return to legitimate academic research under federal protection." The federal coup. By the time FBI tactical teams located Jessica 6 days after her capture in the Newark warehouse, she had accomplished something unprecedented in federal law enforcement history. She had turned all three of her captors into cooperating witnesses and gathered intelligence that would dismantle criminal operations from Boston to Miami. The information provided by Torino, Chen, and Volkov led to the identification and arrest of 89 organized crime figures, the seizure of $47 million in criminal assets, and the disruption of operations that had been active for over a decade throughout the eastern seaboard. But Jessica's greatest achievement wasn't the criminal takedown. It was the demonstration that psychological warfare could be used offensively by federal agents, and that understanding criminal psychology could be more powerful than traditional resistance techniques. What Agent Thompson accomplished, Assistant Director Harrison later explained to a closed session of the Senate Judiciary Committee, fundamentally changed how we approach undercover operations. She proved that the right psychological strategy can turn criminals' own methods against them. Dr. Stevens, who had initially questioned Jessica's psychological fitness for dangerous operations, became one of her strongest advocates. Jessica demonstrated that empathy and emotional intelligence aren't vulnerabilities in federal law enforcement. They're weapons that can be deployed strategically. Her ability to understand and manipulate criminal psychology was more effective than any traditional resistance technique we teach. Legacy and recognition. Jessica's operation became a case study taught at law enforcement training facilities throughout the United States, from Quantico to the federal law enforcement training centers. Her techniques for psychological manipulation and intelligence gathering were incorporated into FBI training programs, and her approach to turning interrogation situations into recruitment opportunities revolutionized federal counterintelligence doctrine. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the change in how federal agencies evaluated candidates for sensitive operations. Jessica's success proved that psychological sophistication and emotional intelligence could be more valuable than traditional markers of mental toughness. Today, Supervisory Special Agent Jessica Phoenix Thompson leads the FBI's Advanced Behavioral Analysis Program at Quantico, training a new generation of federal agents in techniques that blur the line between investigation and psychological operations. Her 6-day captivity in Newark is remembered not as a rescue operation, but as one of the most successful intelligence coups in federal law enforcement history. And when young agents ask her how she turned the tables on some of the country's most sophisticated criminal psychologists, Jessica always gives them the same advice. Never forget that understanding people is the most powerful tool in law enforcement. The moment you truly understand someone's psychology, you can predict their actions and influence their decisions. Sometimes the best defense is knowing exactly how to get inside your enemy's head, because sometimes the person everyone expects to break is exactly the one who will break the system instead, and sometimes the greatest victories come from turning criminals' own psychological weapons against them.